Hey guys, what's up? It's Turdog. Welcome back to GT Sports. This is part 5 of a coding adventure where we're implementing a performance point system similar to what we have in GT5 and GT6 into GT Sport, but also factoring the tires into the equation. Now, in the last video, I found out that I had to rebalance the aero scaling after I figured out that I had to combine lateral and longitudinal grip to make the tire make sense in the PP formula. For today, we're doing something different. So this video is going to be kind of special. We're going to do something really fun at the end. It's going to be very likely, I know I've said this before, so I'm not going to make a promise this time, but I'm expecting this for real this time to be my final video where I feature Java code. Or just Java code, I should say, because I'm planning on definitely porting over to Xamarin after this. So I kind of wanted to celebrate the latest achievement I've managed so far. So let's take a look at what I've changed in the code so far. So last time I had all the cars instantiating on a sport hard tire, which was just to make the code work, because otherwise it would break if it didn't have any tires to start with. But with a car like this that you see on your screen now, it wouldn't make sense to run a sport hard tire. At least for it to come stock with that tire. So I came up with a method to assign a stock tire to the car. Now, why did I do this? Well, I did this because I wanted to change the way the auto-tune works. Because the auto-tune that I'm using, since I don't have any means to tune the car like how you would in game and see a PP value and know that I'm tuning it to specifications that I want for testing purposes, I'm using the program to tune the cars for me. The problem is it's not tuning the way a human would. I'm going to show you what's going on. So let's say I got an 8.6, right? And we're going to do 200 horsepower, 2,000 pounds, because I have no idea what PP this would be. The first thing the program would do is it would do this, and we're going to pretend that we were at Comfort Soft when I came in, and then it would do this, and then if we're going to say the limit would be Comfort Soft, because again I don't know what the PP would be, then it would come in and say, okay, well, we could drop the weight as much as we can. Oh, 2,000 is the limit. Okay, so we're going to be here, and then we're going to raise the power. Okay, so there, and then we can put our Comfort Soft tire on. But it didn't work like, you know, you wouldn't really be able to get, you know, a tune that makes sense, like how this makes sense. Right, because we'd be tuning to a PP, and so maybe, you know, you'd be, let's say there is it's unrestricted, just the PP. You would, you know, get all your weight reduction. You'd put on your best tire, and then your power, you'd be like here, and then you're done. Because there's not enough points left to get any decent power. And then, well, you'd have a few points left where you wouldn't be able to get even 1% more power, but you'd be able to throw something into your downforce if that's applicable for the car you're tuning. But people don't tune that way. They start from stock, right? You start from stock, and then you tune from there. So I wanted the program to tune in a way that doesn't min-max the car in this problematic way. And so the first thing I had to do was assign a stock tire. So let's actually switch over to this car. So how did I decide how I wanted to assign a stock tire? Well, the way I thought of was like this. So I don't have the 8.6 set up in my program yet, but if I did have it set up, it would likely assign the Comfort Hard tire. And that is because of its really low torque at stock setting, right? So its weight is really light, meaning it might actually be able to get into a higher grade of tire, but just for the sake of demonstration, we're going to go with the Comfort Hard. And we're going to use chase camera so that I can show some tire smoke. If this can make tire smoke. I don't even know if I have the power to do that from a stock setup. Alright, so if I'm launching in first gear, I want to be able to spin that tire up. But then when I get into second gear, I want to be able to keep the throttle pinned and have grip, even if I start cornering. Right, so it slides maybe a little bit because there's not a lot of the lateral grip to work with. But aside from that, I can otherwise drive fine. Okay? So, how do you do this? You do a lot of math, right? We use some engineering equations and stuff, and it's really cool stuff. So, we look at the assigned tires method here, and I'm looking at the torque data, and I'm grabbing the peak torque, but instead of getting the RPM where that peak torque occurs, I'm getting the limiter RPM. It's weird, but it kind of works somehow. So that's what I decided to go with overall. So we're coming down here and we are calculating, we're using the top speed of first gear, a constant value 1056, the first gear ratio and the final drive ratio, and using the RPM as well. And you use those numbers together and you're getting the radius of the tire, and then you use the radius of the tire to in conjunction with the other numbers before to solve and get the wheel force. That's a function of the peak torque, the first gear ratio, the final drive ratio, and the tire radius. For the mass, that's just the weight of the car. And then lastly, we have wheel force and we have mass, and we are looking for acceleration. You know, anyone who's done high school physics should remember force equals mass times acceleration. We're just going to rearrange that equation to say acceleration equals force divided by mass, or in this case wheel force, since that's a force. And that gives us an acceleration in meters per second. So we just multiply that by 9.8 to convert to G's. And hey, now we have something that we can compare to the longitudinal grip limits of the tires. Now I ran into a small issue where a high-powered sports cars would sometimes get a racing tire, and that's no good because this is supposed to be a street legal car, but it's getting an illegal tire put on that it wouldn't be allowed to drive on the street with. So and we also had an issue with low-powered race cars, like a Group 4 race car getting put on a road tire, like not even a sports tire at times. It would sometimes be like a comfort soft tire, and I was like, well, that's no good. We gotta fix that. So I have these conditional statements towards the bottom here, where if the acceleration is below the grip limit of a racing hard tire and the total downforce points is above 200, well, that's a low power race car. We're going to multiply the acceleration times the grip limit of a super soft tire and set that equal to the new acceleration, and you know, change the acceleration to that value. That's what the times equal does in Java. Means acceleration equals acceleration times, you know, itself times this other value. And then we have, I couldn't say else because it would change my and to an or, and I still need it to be an and. So we say if the acceleration is greater than the grip limit of a racing hard and the the total downforce is less than 200, well, that's a high-performance sports car. It has downforce maybe because it's a high-performance sports car, and it has a lot of acceleration because, again, it's a high-performance sports car. But it doesn't belong on a racing tire, so we're just going to slam that down and just hard lock at a sport medium tires. We just say acceleration equals the grip limit of a sport medium tire, and then, you know, using the same code that we used to choose the tire for the PP in the previous video, we assigned the tire, you know, using that Price is Right method based on that. So, you know, so the acceleration is as close as possible to the grip limit of the tire without exceeding it. So now it's time to get into the actual tuning that takes place. So the first thing we got to do is convert the car back to stock configuration, because we've likely, in my code, I have to list the cars first, and I show the min, stock, and max PP so that I can see that that's all being computed properly and that the filters are working as they should be. And so the last thing that was done was the car is tuned to max PP, and now we got to return to stock PP. Then I set up this array of flags. We're gonna get back to that later. The next thing I do is I go into the apply limits method. Now what that does is we're calculating the weight limit. So we have it calls a method to do that, and that will just calculate the minimum weight based on PP and compare that with the regulation minimum weight restriction and choose the higher value, because you need to be, because otherwise it would be out of limits. And then it converts that to a percent. There's another method it calls to convert that to a percent. And then if the car is below the weight limit, then it raises the weight to snap it to the weight limit. And then it does the same thing for power, but if the car is above the horsepower restriction, it brings the power down to snap it to that horsepower restriction. And then it returns this array of integer values for those limits. But in this first method call, we're not actually taking those values. We're ignoring that. And then we recalculate the PP in case we've actually had to apply those limits and tune the car to get it within limits. And then after that's done, we install the best tires based on the PP, which is exactly how it functions in the last video. Now I have this limit workaround thing. My first attempt at running this code, I had a bit of a glitch, and it took me a while to figure it out. And then I found out that the flags that I set up here, well, you can't see where I'm pointing. The flags that I set near the start of the master were getting triggered prematurely because of the car getting snapped to limits before running the first pass method. Those flags are only supposed to be triggered when no more tuning can be done. But part of what signals that is that the car is at the limit or at its maximum weight or minimum power. Or the other way. So what I did was, well, if the car is at its max weight, then we drop it 1%, and if it's at minimum power, then we add 1%. So it looks stupid, but it works, so it isn't stupid. And then we calculate the PP again, so that when we get to the rest of the tuning, we're tuning this car properly. So now we're getting the flags back from first pass after we throw the flags into first pass. So what do I mean first pass? Why would I name it that? We have a first pass and a second pass, so it's like ideally like a two-pass system, basically. So here we have an array of integer values for limits, which we get from the apply limits method. We're calling this method again. We're making sure that the car is still within limits after the tuning that we've done. So if the car is within limits, we're going to check if the weight is above the regulation and below the max for the car. And if it is, then the first flag is set to false, which means there's more tuning that can be done. And we call this method called half weight reduction. And we throw the limit into that method. And what that does is we're tuning in half steps to create a balanced tune instead of min-maxing. We calculate a midpoint, so between the target, or in this case the limit of the weight, which is the target, and the current weight, which in the first pass is going to be the stock weight. And we're setting the weight to that midpoint. If the midpoint cannot be achieved, then we set it to the minimum weight or the maximum weight appropriately based on where that target is. Right, so it says half weight reduction, but we actually could in fact be increasing the weight. So we come back into the first pass method and we do and so if that condition had returned false, then we set the weight flag to true, signaling that it is on the limit. There is no more tuning that can be done for the weight. And then we go into the power. So we check, okay, is power within limits? And this limit check method just checks, is it above the minimum for the car? So it also checks if it's below the max for the car as well. And if that returns true, then we set flags 1, which is the power flag, to false. Again, signaling that more tuning can be done. We go in a half power boost. And a half power boost basically does the same thing as the half weight reduction, but for horsepower. And then we calculate the PP once again because we've done some tuning. And then we return the flags to the auto tune master. Next, we have a do while loop. So to understand what a do while loop, if you don't know what that is, I'll have to explain what a while loop is. So while loop, what that means is you have a conditional statement. If that condition returns true, you execute the code. And then when you get done executing the code, you check the condition again. If it returns true, well, you continue executing that code again and again and again until it returns false, and then you escape from the loop. If it returns false, then you just skip over the loop. Well, I don't want to skip over that loop, but I also don't want to have to rewrite the same code twice, so I have do while. So I do, and then I have this method called second pass, which throws in all the same parameters that I had for first pass. Yes. So I do second pass, and then while both flags, see, I distribute this exclamation means not. So while both flags are not true, then it will do it again. When both flags for weight and power are true, not one or the other one, but both, then it will escape from the loop. Okay, so second pass, we go into second pass, let's do first pass again. We've already discussed what first pass does, and what this means is it'll iteratively zero in on that limit because it's recalculating the limit when it goes into apply limits. It's recalculating a new limit based on the current PP, and eventually it's going to hit that limit and those flags are going to flip over to true and we're going to break out of the loop. And the other thing is if the car has adjustable aero, right? So if it doesn't have adjustable aero, then we're done. We don't bother with anything else. But if the arrow is adjustable, then we have to tune that as well. And I've changed the way that code functions quite a bit from the previous method, but it's still otherwise the same idea. Is I'm getting a total pool of allowed arrow points and I'm dividing it in half. And it used to be that I would just have the total pool and not divide it in half because I forgot that modulo was a thing. it basically gives you a remainder, and it's great for determining if a number is even or odd. But I forgot that that was a thing, so I just had this ugly, inefficient for loop that just did, I'll take a point from the pool, give one to front, another one goes to rear. We still have points to work with. We're below the PP, okay? One for front, one for rear. Are we at the PP yet? No. One for front, one for rear, until you get to the PP or max everything out. Well, now we just get the points. We cut it in half, and if it's odd, then the front gets 1 point less, and then divide it in half, and the rear is 1 point more, and divide that in half. And then you distribute the points where it's going to go all in the front first, from the front pool into the front downforce, and whatever's left over from that pool of points from the front downforce gets dumped into the pool of points for the rear downforce. And now you also have to consider we're starting from stock, so, but that's okay. We can still just use addition here because we might get a negative number if we have to take downforce away. And so you just add a negative number, which is the same as subtracting, and it'll work the same way. And so it just calculates it all in one shot and just dumps the points however they have to go, or takes them out however they have to go for the downforce. Okay, and then once you escape from the do while loop, tuning is complete. Okay, so using a slightly older version of this code, my friend Obelisk ran a test. I gave him a list of 10 cars to drive. These included the super formula you see before you, as well as the new 86, the Toyota GT86 Limited, or A6 GT Limited, the Peugeot 908 Group 1 race car, the Ford F-150 Raptor, all the 3 Supras from the prior videos, the 2017 Ford GT, an Impreza, so that we can see, well, how does all-wheel drive fit into the mix, and yeah, and a few other cars as well. He took those cars around Laguna Seca, all of them tuned to 2000 pp. The slowest car in his test was within 2% of the fastest car, of the lap time set by the fastest car. So that is absolutely brilliant. That's probably better than any of the testing I've done so far myself. So, but I want to kind of make this video sort of a send-off for the Java code, because after this, we're porting it all over to Xamarin. So I want to do something flashy. We're going to take 11 cars. It was going to be 12, but the Ford Raptor isn't going to work here. And I'll get to that in a moment. We're going to drive a lap of the Nordschleife with all these cars. The same list of cars that Obelisk worked with, but also with a couple of Group 3 cars thrown in the mix as well. They weren't used before because the code that I used with his test had a slight glitch that kind of didn't tune the Group 3 cars properly, but everything else was tuned mostly within parameters. Still all fitting the regulation, but some of them were a bit lower than what they could have been. Now, the issue with driving around the Nordschleife is it's not like Laguna Seca. Laguna Seca is a much twistier circuit, right? Whereas the Nordschleife has some high-speed sections. So, can I actually bring this up in the menu so we can actually look at the course maps? Right, so we have Laguna Seca here, and it's a rather twisty circuit, It's only 2.25 miles long. So those straights that it has, they're not real straights. You're only going straight for a few seconds. I mean, they're straights, but like they don't really feel it. You don't really, the high horsepower cars don't have time to stretch their legs. On the Nordschleife though, yes, you have about 75 corners to deal with. However, you have 3 sections that are really high speed flat out. It would be very easy for a car with 600 or 700 horsepower to run away at over 200 miles an hour. But we also have cars in this list that at the PP only have about 300 or 400 horsepower. In fact, the average horsepower of all of these cars in the list that we're going to run is 475 horsepower. So to keep the high horsepower cars from running away, I've decided that I'm going to cap everything at 500 horsepower. So we're tuning the 2000 PP 500 horsepower to try and balance things out a little better. And this also gives me the opportunity to test a real number, a real restriction on the horsepower like 500, instead of using 99.99 to say that it's unrestricted. When that's how my code reads an unrestricted horsepower. So, since we're running so many cars, we're not going to go in depth with the tunes themselves like I normally would with the Supras. I'm just going to kind of flash through the tunes with screenshots, and then we're just going to get into the driving. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. I've had a lot of fun working on this code. It's been quite the project here. The class itself is over 1,300 lines of code. Granted, I do a lot of double space here and there to space some lines apart so to make it easier to read, and I do put in a pretty decent amount of annotation so that I know what I'm doing, and sometimes I just make whole paragraphs of annotations for no reason, or to remind myself what I was thinking about when I stopped coding and then pick it up later. So yeah, but anyway, it's still a lot of code. So yeah, that aside, it's time to get into the tuning and then into the driving. I hope you guys enjoy. Alright, so the Super Formula has reduced power, increased weight. It's on a comfort medium tire, and its downforce is ever so slightly increased. The M3 is on a super soft tire with increased power and reduced weight. Same deal for the 86 GT Limited. The 908 HDI, reduced power, increased weight, comfort medium tire, maxed out downforce in the rear, almost in the front. Lancia and the Road Supra are similar deal with the M3. The Group 4 Supra is on a racing hard tire. The Group 3 is on a sport soft. And then we have the 4GT here. And then the Impreza on a super soft. The Corvette Group 3, similar to the Group 3 Supra. Let's go. 4GT, we got sport soft tire. 100 downforce in the rear, but it's not adjustable, but it's also dynamic aero, which is the only car on this list to feature that. So that's cool. This has a bit of a problem with understeer. Now I've adjusted the suspension a bit to try to mitigate the problem a little bit. Alright, so as we start the lap, already we can see this car gets loose very easily, despite having high downforce as a Group 1 car, being on that comfort medium tire and having more power, being at that 500 horsepower cap right up there. It is a rather unforgiving experience. You can feel the difference in the grip on the racing hard tire. You can also feel the downforce helping out in the high speed sections. You really get a sense that it's definitely like in the middle
It's not one extreme or the other. Alright, so as you can see, the M3 tackles the tight corners pretty well with the super soft tire, but the lack of downforce means I'm not going to be able to keep my foot in it around the fluke plots and other high-speed corners that I could with the super formula. Right, fluke plots flat out. Easy. On a comfort medium tire, because I got all of this downforce from the super formula. Seeing the suspension has helped though. I originally wasn't going to, so I can mimic Obelisk's test around what was it, Laguna Seca, but I have about 60 more corners to deal with than he did. So, compression can be quite scary with this, not because of instability, but because, well, yeah, because you have to wait till after compression to actually brake, and you need to be on those brakes nice and early. I'm going to go with a setup that makes the car handle a little bit better, just so I can control it consistently. As you can see, the slightest dip in concentration around some of these faster corners can very well mean the end of this run. So, I believe the tune has less weight than the M3's tune. And if I could just keep all four wheels on the ground, I'll make some of these corners a little easier. This car carries momentum pretty well, but part of that is it seems to be a little underpowered. This is the Lancia Delta. Just on the throttle. Keep some grip in the front. Oh, man, that was smooth. This next corner is kind of dicey. Carry that momentum as much as possible. This car is a little underpowered. We're going to struggle up the hill a little bit. I lengthened the gear ratios because I was worried about getting rev limited. I'm not sure that was actually necessary. So as you can see, we're in fourth gear here. Just chugging along. So as you can see, the sport soft tires are a little funky here, but the downforce augments the grip enough. It's not quite so bad. Well, it's not ideal. I got a bit more rotation than what I wanted. May have braked a little too much for that one. And part of that is I'm not used to the gear ratios. Alright, a high speed section here. Or medium speed or whatever. Medium speed. I think it's worth mentioning this car feels a lot more balanced tuned this way because it's so close to its stock tune now. Even though it is on the Racing Super Soft tire, all other things considered, it just feels good. It flows through the corners. Though part of that could just also be the weight distribution. Probably just because it's close to stock. Brake before. Don't be brave here either. Oh crap. Oh crap, the road's just dropping away and the car just wants to follow. A little early here. Oh, and I'm still just barely holding on. Understeer off the course so badly. Come on. Get that speed. I need the top speed here as much as possible. The car is definitely going to understeer off the track there if I hadn't downshifted there. Alright, check out the speed now. 290 Ks. Can I get 300? That would be 186 miles per hour. And yes, we hit 300. This is going to be exciting. Oh, there's fifth gear. Okay. Alright. Well, we're probably above 240 Ks. I have no idea how fast we're going at this point. 7, 8. We're not going to hit 270. Nope, not quite. That last section very dicey. We're getting a little too early for that final corner. Oh well.
All right. So with all the cars having done their lap, let's see what we have here. We're actually going to go into this screen here because I have more than 10 cars that I've tested. Now, At first glance, this looks like a wide distribution. Remember that the Nordschleife is a rather long track, and so mistakes and little inconsistencies will pile up over time. The important thing is to consider the percentage of the difference rather than the raw difference itself. 3 seconds of difference in a lap between the 908 Team Peugeot Group 1 car and the Super Formula car is not that big of a difference. That's less than a second difference on, say, Laguna Seca or any of those, or Suzuka or anything, you know, like a normal size. The key thing here is we're looking at the percentage difference. Now, if we consider what is 3% slower than the 908, well, 3% slower lap time would be a 7:17.732, which means all of these cars here in the top 7 would be going toe-to-toe with each other. You could maybe argue the M3 would. I did have a stock transmission on it, and I'm not sure if that negatively affected its acceleration or not. I kind of believe it may have. So, yeah, but the other interesting thing to look at is look at how the closer groups are grouped up together. So this one kind of stands apart at 3 seconds, and then these two are really close together. Less than a second difference, actually. They're entirely different kinds of cars. A Super Formula and a Group 4 car, you wouldn't expect them to compete at such a very close level, and here they are. Okay, we have the Ford GT and the Group 3 car, the Corvette, being separated by only 1 second. And then oh, here's another one. The road car Supra and the Group 3 Supra, only 0.3 of a second between them on a whole lap of the Nordschleife. That is rather impressive. Now here we see the Group 3 cars, they just struggle to keep up under these regulations. Now, I would have liked to have had all of the cars kind of grouped up nicely together, but this also shows that, hey, you know, at some point, you know, these cars would not be viable for the user to choose. This car may not even be viable for the user to choose as well, but all the rest of them would be. Now, the thing is I could have reduced the horsepower restriction, I could have increased the weight restriction, but then these two cars, which I really wanted to test as well, also would have been left out. Recall that in the first video, I tested these two cars, and we had a huge disparity around Les Arth. It was like 30 or 45 seconds difference. It was no good. But when you do the PP plus that horsepower restriction, it brings the cars close together. Not just within the 3%, but within 3 seconds. That's a huge deal. So I'm really, really satisfied with how my code is working with tuning these cars. And now I feel like everything is set. The foundation is set. I can port my code over to Xamarin, and then all I have to do is work out building the GUI and working out any syntax issues and any possible class mismatch issues that might arise from trying to get Java code to run through C# in Xamarin. So with that said, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.